So we've recorded a series of podcasts on the microbiome and its wide-ranging impacts. But boy, is this a field that moves rapidly. As soon as you think you've covered much of the territory, along comes some new and exciting finding. And this is the case today, or tonight as it is. It's today for our guest, but tonight for me. As we're going to describe research done by our guest, Dr. Ibrahim Javed. He has done innovative work on links between the gut microbiome and the brain, particularly focused on Alzheimer's disease. I'm Kelly Brownell, Professor and Dean Emeritus and Director Emeritus of the World 2 Policy Center at Duke University. Dr. Ibrahim Javed is an Enterprise Fellow and National Health and Medicine Research Council Emerging Leadership Fellow in Clinical and Health Sciences at the University of South Australia. He's also an Adjunct Senior Research Fellow at the Australian Institute for Bioengineering and Nanotechnology at the University of Queensland. Dr. Javed, thanks so much for joining us. I'm really grateful that you can be with us today.
Yep. Thank you very much, Kelly. It is really exciting for me to be here with you.
So let's begin, if you wouldn't mind, with an explanation from you about what the gut-brain axis is and tell us how it's important.
Yep. So now we see a lot of researchers around the globe building on investigations around the gut-brain axis. But if we look into what this gut-brain axis actually is, it's kind of like a bidirectional communication between two organs in our body, the gut and the brain. And when we particularly talk about gut, we have our stomach and our different portions of the intestine. But what we actually interested in is actually the microbiome and all those small little things living inside the gut. So there are around 100 trillion microbes in the gut, which are 3 times more than the number of cells in our body. So we are kind of like more microbes than human cells. And they communicate with different organs in our body, and how they communicate with the brain, that's we can describe it as a gut brain axis. And this whole gut brain axis thing was somehow kind of invisible to us. We were just looking at it as a fecal material or waste coming out of our body. But now we see a lot of importance that these gut microbes, they help us in a lot of daily things that we do. They shape our behavior, our response to stress, our immune system, and how we respond to different medicines, how we do our daily tasks. So they have a lot of role in that. They help us digesting the food. That's their main obvious function. But now we are getting more and more information about them, that how they are integrated with a lot of different things in our body. So kind of like they are partners in our life.
That's a very, very nice explanation. Now, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you tell us about the importance of microbial diversity?
Yep. So microbial diversity we can refer to as a composition of all those bacteria, viruses, and fungi to some extent that live in our digestive tract, and also in a lot of other animals as well. And this diversity is very crucial in maintaining the gut health and on overall well-being of humans. And this microbiome whole thing is like it is obviously associated with a lot of health benefits and how we develop disease. But it's also like right from the beginning of our age, they help us developing our brains. They help maturing the brain system and the immune system. Obviously, they help us in digesting food. And there is a big yeah, generally we can actually divide them in two portions. So one, we can call them a good gut bacteria. They help us in all these things. And then there are bad gut bacteria, which are kind of like kept within a bay. They are kept under control by this good gut bacteria with the help of the rest of our body. And in somehow in some conditions with the age, or with dietary habits or environmental factor or lifestyle, if they overcome and they take over the control in the gut, that's where the thing starts going haywire.
You know, growing up, microbes were a bad thing. You didn't want to have microbes. And now we hear that there are good microbes, and now you're talking about the balance. There are still bad ones, but good ones. And the balance of those two is a really important thing. So let's talk about how bad bacteria find their way to the brain. How do they get access?
Yep. So Initially, as we discussed, like they are kept within the bay. They are kept under control by good bacteria and also by other different immune system in the body. So we have different checkpoints, like we have different barriers. So we can kind of like have it as three different compartments: the gut and the blood and the brain. And we have barriers that separate out these compartments. And these barriers are very tightly controlled, very good health cells, tightly integrated with each other, and they police that whole things, what need to go across and what does not need to go across, what we need to stop it within that compartment. So if we have like the environmental factors, dietary habits, and these bad gut bacteria overcome, they produce a lot of different molecules to communicate with each other, and they produce a lot of different molecules to take over the good bacteria. And these molecules, if specifically if they can get across those barriers, and specifically if they can get into the brain, like that's what we are researching about. Like if they get out to the brain, they can do a lot of different bad things in the brain. So they can do that by hijacking this gut brain axis. And this compartmental thing is one pathway that they can get from gut to the blood and then from the blood to the brain. But there is also a direct highway that connects gut to the brain, and that's our enteric nervous system. These are specific nerves or neurons, for example, vagus nerve, they're quite famous. So it's a direct link between the gut and brain. This nerve help us in a lot of different daily tasks without we even know about it, like digestion and heart rate and respiration and emptying the stomach. And these are kind of like a pathway for bidirectional communication. So a lot of molecules go up and down across these highway, and the bad gut bacteria, they can actually hijack it and they can put their stuff into this highway, and they can send it across the brain.
Yeah, it's a very, very nice explanation you have of a very complicated process. And I find it absolutely fascinating. So, you've spoken, I know, about how bad bacteria can be opportunistic pathogens and can trigger problems or enhance the progression of existing problems. How does all that work?
So we are investigating about dementia in Alzheimer disease. So as we discussed, like these bad gut bacteria, so we are specifically working on Pseudomonas aeruginosa and E. coli, and they are quite common. Like a lot of school kids, they know about these bacteria. They are quite commonly studied in high school microbiology. So they produce some molecules which help these bacteria to make biofilms around them. So they kind of build a castle around them to protect their colonies and for their own survival. And they keep surviving then until they get an opportunity to expand their castles and build more biofilms. So these molecules, they have quite similarity in terms of their structure and in terms of how they communicate with some proteins which are not related to bacteria anyhow. They are produced in the brain to do some normal stuff in the brain, but they also aggregate in Alzheimer disease using the same mechanism of the nature that these bacteria use for these proteins to make their biofilms. Based on this common similarity, if they can somehow see each other, or if those gut bacteria can send those proteins or aggregate of those proteins across the brain through using those highways, and they can induce the aggregation of those normal, naive working, innocent proteins which we have in our brain that has nothing to do with the bacteria. But if they can be accessed by those bacterial proteins, they go haywire and they trigger the onset of the disease, or if there is already going on, that they can actually accelerate that whole process. And this concept, actually, we have seen that concept before in prion disease, where by eating an infected food that have those prion particles can actually go from gut to the brain, and they can induce the normal prion protein in the brain to start making aggregates in a similar way.
So, are there interventions that can stop the pathogenic bacteria from in the gut that might in turn affect the brain?
So more we should focus on initially as a preventive measure. We can focus on maintaining a good diversity within the gut, of having supporting those good bacteria in that fight and keeping them healthy and alive as we age. Because as we age over the period of life, like those good bacteria, we keep losing them. So if we can have all those good things of exercise, balanced sleep, and more importantly, the good food and balanced variety of food. So we have a lot of different variety to support that variety of gut bacteria in the gut. So that's, I think, is the most important preventive measure to keep that balance intact. But of course, we in the future, like as a therapeutic intervention, we are moving towards to develop microbiome therapies where we can modulate that composition. If that composition is not in a very good situation, we can actually modulate that by using probiotics and prebiotic dietary factors, or some microbial compositions like yogurt and lot of other foods. There are kind of bacterial compositions, so we can modulate that to inoculate those bacteria which are missing in the gut, and try to achieve that balance, and that balance will accelerate the effectivity of the medicine which we are taking for any other disease.
So the advice we've heard from some of our other guests, eat a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, consume things. You mentioned yogurt, kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, and things like that. Sound like they're very good for enhancing the health of the microbiome. Is there anything else beyond that that might be relevant for the brain in particular?
So in particular, like directly for the brain health, there are some antioxidant foods. For example, we have coumarin, and we have some senolytic compounds. We cannot call them drugs because they are kind of like a food supplements. They are available in any pharmacy and superstores by a lot of different names. Mostly these are polyphenolic compounds. So they are usually available in green tea and in green tea extracts. So they are quite well known for their healthy and antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effect. Research around the globe have shown that there are good effects directly on the brain by these polyphenolic compounds. So these green tea extracts, so they are like quercetin and some other galectin compounds.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting, the future of all this. And it's wonderful that you're making such important contributions to it. And I, for one, am going to follow your work and see what comes as you continue to publish such important studies. So thanks so much for doing wonderful work. And thanks so much for joining us and sharing. Thank you to our listeners for being listeners. And special thanks to Deborah Hill for her skilled work in producing this series. If you'd like to subscribe to Leading Voices in Food podcast series, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and the podcasts are also available on the website of the Duke World Food Policy Center. This is Kelly Brownhill.